I'd like to introduce to you our first guest. He's known as Mr. Alice Cooper's executioner. Let's give a nice round of applause for the fantabulous magician known as Mr. James Randi. And before we introduce our next guest, I've been given permission. I've been given the greatest permission to read an excerpt from the upcoming book, A Magician in the Laboratory, as written by Mr. James.
That's laboratory, not lavatory, in case you're wondering.
Laboratory, how's that?
Very good.
All right. This is from his words. Years ago, I toured the USA and several foreign markets as part of the Alice Cooper rock show, the $1 Billion Babies episode. My job was to chop Coop's head off with a guillotine every single night, hopefully without actually doing him any harm. It worked for more than 3 months, and during that period of time, I had the nightly opportunity of seeing a rather unique phenomenon. Coop and I were always the last to leave the dressing room to begin the show because I had to equip him with 2 handheld mechanisms that enabled him to throw long flames from his fingertips. These were semi-dangerous. Who ever heard of semi-dangerous? Semi-dangerous? These were semi-dangerous devices which he'd only take into his hands at the very last moment. When the stage manager would poke his head in the door and announce 2 minutes, I would watch Vincent Furnier.
Well, close enough.
Yeah, him too. Coop's original name rapidly and almost magically changed from a reasonably normal young man into the showbiz monster that his audience expected him to be. He adopted the character by simply putting it on like a pullover. His walk, his facial expression, his entire demeanor changed. And a moment later, as he would totter up the stairs, Frankenstein monster-like, into the spotlight, Vincent would become Alice Cooper. 2 hours later, when he retired from the stage, dressed in white satin tails and top hat, he again became Vincent as soon as he hit the lights of the dressing room. I always admired that in him, his ability to step into fantasy and then shed it so easily. It's a talent we might all try to acquire. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alice Cooper!
Furnier. Vincent Damon Furnier. And by the way, Randy actually looked like this in 1976. And I have pictures of him as a baby. He looked just like this. It's amazing.
Yeah. My apologies for bastardizing your last name.
No,
I never
okay.
studied French. But it's a wonderful name nonetheless. Folks, as you know, like I said once before, this is our $1 Billion Babies Tour 1973. So this discussion is going to mainly focus on that. I'm sure many of you may have a few questions, but we're going to listen to these gentlemen chat. And I have, I guess, the start of this question. Mr. Cooper, how in fact did you find this man?
Well, you know, the idea was we had already basically decided that rock and roll needed another dimension. And rock and roll didn't have a villain. Rock and roll was full of heroes, but there was no villain. And I would gladly be Captain Hook to all the Peter Pans out there. You know, I was born to be the villain. And so we decided that Alice Cooper, I mean, I would definitely be the Basil Rathbone of rock and roll. And when we finally got that, we pretty much alienated every organization in America and thought, let's take it one step further and bring illusion into it now. The most dangerous thing in the world was to give Alice Cooper money. You know, because we were making our own props, and we would find things backstage, and that would be the prop for the night. We actually had money now because School's Out did very well. And then all of a sudden, $1 Billion Babies was the #1 record, and we could afford the best guy in the business. So we said, well, let's get Randy and let's start adding illusion to the show. And that's when we came up with the, the guillotine and things like that. And I really wasn't willing to put my head in a guillotine without somebody that really knew what they were doing.
Wise decision.
Yeah.
I must tell you how I heard about it. I don't know whether you know this story, Coop. I was in the magic shop, of all places, on 34th Street one afternoon with some of the other magicians sitting around. We were telling one another stories, some of them true. And the phone rang, and the proprietor picked up the phone, answered it, and then he put his hand over the phone, and he said, a fellow connected with an Alice Cooper. I hadn't heard the name, frankly, I must admit I had, and he hadn't heard either. He said he wants to talk to a magician who will travel with a rock show. And I put up my hand and I said, I'll do it if he pays me $100 just to talk to him. And he went back to the phone and he said, he'll pay it. $100 at that time was a lot more than $100 today, I can assure you. I got out of there, I burned the stairs as I went down, and I showed up at the Alive Enterprises office. You weren't there.
No.
And, but Shep was, and several other people. I think Joe Gannon might have been there.
Joe Gannon, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I noticed something about the decor. This is great. They had potted plants all over the place, all dead. This is Alive Enterprises, remember? And all the potted plants hadn't been watered, they were all dead. I thought that was a good touch, and I said, oh, these are my kind of people, right away. And they talked to me, and we made a deal, and I ended up working for the $1 Billion Baby Show.
Yeah, he was the perfect, I think the perfect foil for Alice. It was it was the first time anybody had seen this kind of a show anyways. So when you're adding another dimension to it, all of a sudden you're doing, Alice would be over here, and Randy would say, now when you go over there, we're going to switch this over here. And you're misdirecting the audience, and it's all stuff that we wanted to do but didn't know how to do. And that's when we brought Randy in. He was the guy that really knew how to do all that stuff.
Which, if I could interject, which was an amazing thing about that, because this was live. We were, back in '73, Rosemary's Baby, things of that nature.
Right.
That kind of horror genre was, movie, special effects, theatrics in that way. This was live, could not be messed up, could not be fooled, could not be tricked, the whole 9 yards. You brought in the amazing Randy to chop your head off, and obviously it succeeded because you went on a few other locations after that to carry out those same tricks, I do believe.
Well, and every night he would be back the next morning alive, and I couldn't figure it out. I chopped his head off. Come on, he doesn't seem to take chopping very seriously.
We did another bit called, it was Unfinished Sweet. And the story behind this was, the guy would go to a dentist office, and he would get under gas, and he would have this dream that he was a super spy. So one guitar would be playing the Man from U.N.C.L.E. theme, one guitar would be playing I Spy, and the other thing, the James Bond theme. Now, if you put them all together, they actually all work together. But I would be in the dentist chair, and Randy would come out as the mad dentist, and he had a drill that was bigger than him. And it came down, it was all lit up, and he would start drilling my teeth, and then he would take it down to my crotch and start drilling my crotch. I don't remember rehearsing that part.
That's very true, very true. I made it up.
You improvised that part, yeah. And it was, when you see film of this right now, it's very vaudevillian. But that was the charm of it, I think, was the fact that everything was trying to be high-tech, and we went back to the vaudevillian kind of attitude of rock and roll. Which drew people like Groucho Marx and Mae West. Groucho Marx would come to the show and bring Mae West, Fred Astaire, Jack Benny, George Burns. They would be standing on the side watching the show. The audience was cringing in horror at what was going on, and they were standing there going, 1923, Gracie and I did that. And Toledo, we were in Toledo, and we... Except the snake he had wasn't as big as that snake. But they were not in the least bit alarmed at anything we were doing because it was vaudeville to them. They grew up in vaudeville. So our show had this vaudevillian flavor to it. It was sort of also like that show that at the carnival that you didn't want to go to, but you really wanted to go to. There's the big tent, and then there's that show on the right over here that that was the creepy kind of, really, do I want to go in there? You know, that was our show, you know. And we did, my audience was not the Crosby, Stills, and Nash audience. I was in charge of the Lunatic Fringe, which you, well, never mind. I think you know all about that. So we were in charge of all these sort of outcasts and people that didn't quite fit in, but there were millions of them, you know.
Oh yeah, And do you remember Baltimore?
Well, I remember Baltimore. It's still there, I think.
Yes, I believe so, yes. But I think this, if I'm wrong on this, this is the senility creeping in again. But at one point, I remember that Shep called a meeting of us all in panic. He said, oh, something really bad has happened. I thought, what now? And you were there, and I think you were a bit puzzled. And he made the announcement. He said that the mayor of Baltimore had given you the key to the city. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember that, yes.
Yes, and he said, we don't want that. We want the parents to absolutely despise Alice, you see, so that they'll forbid the kids to go, which means the kids have to go. This is a way of forcing the audience to be there, and we got over it somehow.
Yeah, we had to insult somebody in order to not get the key to the
Something
city.
like that, yes. But we managed it.
Yeah, we went out of our way to not try to get those accolades. You know, they came later on, you know, when you're young and dangerous. Now I'm sort of old and treacherous now. But, you know, lovable though.
And by doing what you did, by wanting, you know, that type of audience to appreciate that, you know, well, here we are.
Well, yes, and like I said, there are millions of you out there, trust me.
And do you remember when you came to me and said that your mother was going to be in the audience?
Yeah.
Now, this was in Phoenix, was it?
No, my mother's probably the most dangerous person you'll ever meet. You have to understand that. You know, I mean, she doesn't flinch at anything. She's just like, you know.
Well, Coop came to me and he said, he was a little worried about it. He said, would you mind sitting with my mother? She'll be in the fourth row. We got reserved seats there, because she's never really seen the act. She doesn't know what I do. Duh. And I thought, well, this is going to be a shock for this lady. I can assure everybody of that. And he was pretty sure of it too. I sat with her, and when Coop walked on stage in the torn costume, tearing up a doll or whatever he was doing at that moment, not a chicken, I swear. And his mother sat there and said, oh, Vincent, why is Vincent's costume torn? I can fix that, you know. and I just patted her on the arm. I was trying to be very, very soft and gentle with her. And I said, no, this is all part of the act. Wait till you see. And then she started to warm up a little bit, but I had to leave and go and do another part backstage. And when I came back to see her, she was hooping and hollering. She was with it at that point.
Sure.
She suddenly realized what the gag was, and who you were and what you were doing and why.
Yeah, and she was, you know, she was one of those ones that said, you know, not enough blood. You know, I was expecting a little more blood than that in the show. I don't think when the head comes off, the artery shoots out far enough in the audience. My mom and dad both got the show. My dad was a pastor. And, you know, he was one of those guys that, as an example, he'd be shaving, you know, and I would open the Bible up and I'd say, Ezekiel 3:17. He said, and the Lord says unto me, you know, and he would quote it. I'd say, okay. I'd open it up again. I'd say, okay, Matthew 5:12. And he says, and Jesus said unto them, you know, I go, wow, this guy's good. You know, and I'd say, who plays bass for the Animals? He goes, Chaz Chandler. See, the guy was really good. I mean, he really liked the music. He liked what we were doing. He got the fact that I wasn't satanic. You know, he got the fact that was my sense of humor, and I was creating a character that I was going to play. Of course, which was misinterpreted by a lot of people, but, you know, it was funny that my parents, I never had a problem with my parents. I wrote all these songs about parents being the problem, whereas my parents were never the problem. I had the same thing with School's Out. I wrote all these songs about, you know, how horrible school was. I was, you know, I was like, I owned my school, you know. And, you know, it was one of those things where, like, I had no problem in school. I had girlfriends doing my homework. I was in a band. I was on the cross-country team. And, you know, I was Mr. Personality, you know. So, you know, It was funny. I wrote all these things about things that never happened to me.
And I was invited to Coop's recent birthday party. Shall we name the number?
Oh, sure, 60. I was 60.
Okay,
Listen, I earned all 64 years.
Yes, yes. And I was
earned
invited
every
to
year.
the birthday party, and so many old faces were there. It was a wonderful get-together of the old gang. And I met his mother. And I sat with her at a table, and she said, you know, when you joined me in the audience there, I didn't know who you were, and I didn't know what Vincent was doing up on stage, but you made it very much easier for me. I want to thank you for that. And she remembered the event very well.
No, she's sharp as a tack. My mom is still, she's 87, and she's just, as sharp as can be.
Someone older than I don't believe that.
I know. I'm
only 84.
We were talking about how back then you were trying to alienate. When we lived in Los Angeles, we got to a point where we were pretty much going to be run out of LA because, it was like people would come to our show to leave. They would go to the show so they can say they left in the middle of the show, which attracted Zappa. That's what attracted Frank Zappa to us, is that. But at one point, Shep says, I have this idea. We're going to go on stage in clear plastic suits with nothing on underneath. And I'm going to call the police and get you arrested because it'll be great. It'll be great publicity that Alice Cooper gets arrested. So, of course, we're on stage playing. He calls the police show up. By the time you get there now, the clear plastic suits had heated up. And you couldn't see anything because it was all, and the police said, I don't see anything wrong with this. We couldn't get arrested. We literally understood at that point we could not get arrested in LA. So we moved to Detroit, but we figured we could get arrested in Detroit. But
you should tell them the story about when the semis didn't arrive with the stage.
Oh man,
what city was that in?
Oh man, I don't know.
It was dead winter.
The gas shortage, right? Did it happen during that time? There was a gas shortage during that time.
Well, yeah, I don't know what it was, but the semis, the big trucks, didn't arrive at the stage. The stage was monstrous and beautiful, made out of what, 1.5 inch plexiglass?
Yeah, every time you'd step on the, it would light up. I mean, it was really.
Yeah, it was a beautiful stage. I think one of the best stages I have ever, certainly the best stage I have ever personally seen in my life. It was so versatile and so electronified. I mean, really, it did react.
It was like Busby Berkeley,
exactly.
On electrodes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it didn't arrive, and we had to go out in trucks and pick up used Christmas trees, can you imagine, with some tinsel still hanging on them, and arrange them. We only had to do that for one night, but everybody in the crew, myself, everybody, we all went out and picked up old Christmas trees and spray painted them and put them around the stage. I don't think the kids knew the difference.
No, it was, in fact, that's the show I would have wanted to be at because it would have been a one-off show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And a lot of times you had to improvise, one night, the snake was a very big part of the show. I mean, it was only on stage for maybe three minutes or so. But I go to get the snake, and I had it in the bathroom. I like to swim at night in the bathtub, and it was gone. And I realized we were in a brand new hotel that didn't have lids on the toilets. So it went down into the toilet, into the plumbing of the hotel. This is a snake this big around.
Yeah.
Her name was Yvonne. That was our big snake.
Yvonne the snake, yes.
We had Boa Derek. We had Julia Squeezer. Little Boa Peep. Was a smaller one. But this one was our biggest snake, and she's gone. So Randy, all of us are tearing the walls apart in this hotel trying to find the snake.
Nuts.
It came up 2 weeks later in Charlie Pride's toilet. Now, I didn't ask Charlie. Charlie was chasing me at the time, at the Grammys with an axe, I think he was, and I didn't ask him if he was sitting on the toilet at the time or if he was shaving and just kind of looked over and this snake comes up out of the toilet like in a horror movie. This snake wouldn't hurt anybody. It was like, it was a gentle giant. But I could imagine if you were sitting on the toilet and this thing came up between your legs, it would get your attention.
That would get your attention.
It would get your attention.
To say the least, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
But you handling that big snake, you could barely walk when you had that snake around your neck.
That one was big. She was really big, but she was probably 12 feet long.
At least, oh yeah.
60 pounds, 70 pounds. I weighed 90. So the snake weighed as much as I did.
And all coiled around you inside, constantly fighting the snake off. Not fiercely or anything like that. He was just sort of trying to arrange it so that he could move around and still move his mouth.
Yeah, this thing was huge. It was really a big snake. But the snake thing was always great. It was always one of those things that, and everybody finally on the tour got so used to the snake that nobody, even if you had a fear of snakes, it didn't bother you anymore. In fact, the one that I left in here was in the front row on the floor somewhere in there.
I don't.
Oh, here it is. Oh, never mind.
Okay.
If I could ask a personal question here, and you told me it was pretty okay to touch into anything and everything. Mr. Randy, you were originally a Canadian citizen. And
at one time, yes.
From what I understand, because of this man sitting next to you, I'm assuming, I'd like to hear your part of it, you have and are now, or had been, an American citizen due to an incident with the
that's
the Mounties, the Canadian Mounties.
Yeah, that's the trigger that set it off. We did Niagara Falls. Do you remember Niagara Falls? Oh, yes, okay. We had a large room full of lockers. It was, I think, the football team's locker room or something, where we could set up the props, and so it was at a school. And I had several parts to play during the show, and I did the opening act or whatnot, went to the dressing room and tried to get in, and there was an RCMP, that's Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that's the Canadian equivalent of the FBI, the federal police, and he wanted to know where I was going. I said, into the dressing room, I got to get my costume changed and I got to get some props. I was looking a little hesitant at this time, I guess, and he said, okay, and he opened the door, and when I walked inside, the RCMP was trashing that locker room. They were very angry because they had come in looking for narcotics, didn't find any, and they decided that they would make a big fuss, and they trashed the room. They were taking doors off lockers and taking stuff out of the lockers. They had clipped off a lot of the padlocks on the lockers that belonged to the students in the school, from the sports team. And I looked around and I saw that my props were pretty well destroyed, and I'd have to improvise somehow. And when I left that room, that's the time when I made a decision saying, what the hell do I need Canada for? You've been very good to me, thank you, but no longer. I'm going to become an American citizen, and I set out to do it at that very moment. And I've never regretted the decision.
Well, the odd thing, I guess, at the time was the fact that we had a very good reputation for not being druggies.
Exactly.
We drank beer. We lived on beer, come to think of it, We kind of proved that you could live forever on beer if you were in your 20s. And so we had a very good reputation for never ever having, and the reason was because the band that opened for us in 1971 was Cheech and Chong. You go over the border with Cheech and Chong in 71. They took everything in our possessions apart. I mean, it was just like unbelievable. And of course, we never had anything, beer cans is the only thing they could find. And we did finally get a good reputation. Now, I don't know if somebody decided that they were going to make an example out of us in Niagara Falls or not. But I think after that, we just went right through the border back and forth without ever changing. Now, it was funny thing was bands like Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath and groups like that, we all drank beer. The Mamas and the Papas, James Taylor, the Monkees, all had heavy drug problems. I mean, all the groups, that were like the Squeaky Clean 16 magazine bands were the ones that were all into that stuff, and we'd sit there going, I don't want to get involved in that, And
as a layman, as not a rock and roll person myself, into this ambiance here that I was suddenly plunged into by being hired to chop the man's head off every night and a few other things, I was very sensitive to that. I thought, oh boy, I bet I'm going to see a lot of doper. I didn't see any trace of it whatsoever. Pot, I could smell pot. Most of that was coming from the audience.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Yes.
No, if you went to Canada, by the third song you're going, I'd kill for a Dorito right now. You know, you're in the middle of a song and you're going, does anybody have any Oreos? You're dying up here. All you had to do was breathe. I don't know what the big deal was at the border, because once you got over there, it was everywhere, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, so, but anyways, that was really, that was the peak of our drug existence was that, you know. Now, you know, drugs for me are like, you know, Sinex, you know, Pepsid AC.
Can I have a cigar?
Yeah, hey, you want some of this? Yeah, this is really good stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. But, you know, by the way, I don't think the Monkees were into hard drugs, come to think of it. They were drinkers too. But, you know, a lot of the really squeaky clean bands that were, you know, above reproach were all into the hard drugs. And it was just the opposite of what you would think.
Yeah,
you know.
Exactly. But Coop had a very good principle, and I was very happy to hear this read at the very first performance. He would carry a can of beer around on the stage usually, but he never took more than one sip out of any open can of beer. It would come open, he would take a sip from it, put it down, a prop man would come and get it and replace it with a fresh can right away, because he was deathly afraid, and rightly so, that somebody might drop something into that can of beer that could be harmful to him. That was a wise decision.
Early in our career, we did shows with the Grateful Dead, who felt that it was their obligation to turn everybody on to LSD in 1968. And I mean, I would sit there with my hand over my beer like this. You know, because the last thing you want to do is be on stage as Alice Cooper and then come on to LSD. I mean, that would be you're in the guillotine going, wait a minute, what am I doing in here? You know. So anyways, we never got into psychedelics, you know, at least I didn't, you know, and our show was crazy enough where you didn't really want to be involved in anything like that.
Very true.
And I never drank on stage. When I finally quit drinking, which was like 30 years ago, I went in and my psychiatrist said, well, he says, how much do you drink on stage? I went, I never drink on stage. I said, oh. He says, well, when you're doing a movie, how much do you drink when I said, I never drink when I'm acting on the movie. He says, let me get this straight. Alice doesn't drink. I said, yeah. And he says, but you do. I said, yeah. He goes, so Alice is not the alcoholic here, is he? You know, because I kept blaming everything on Alice, you know, because he was an easy scapegoat. Well, I do it because of Alice, you know, and realized that actually Dr. Jekyll was much worse than Mr. Hyde. And that's when I really realized that when I did work, I was never drunk. Or I had to actually make it look like I was drunk because people wanted me to look like that, you know, but I never drank when I was actually working, performing. It was the other 22 hours, you know, so, I mean, that was a revelation to me, you know. And
do you remember when we hit, what was it? It wasn't Phoenix, no, it was, I'm sorry, you'll come up with the city in a moment for me when you realize what I'm about to say. We checked into a hotel, and I went out on the balcony at the back, had a beautiful view of the parking lot, and I looked over to the adjacent balcony, and here's Coop standing there. And Coop points down into the parking lot and says, what the hell is that? A big white van with a jet motor on the top of it,
yeah,
like from an Electra plane, and it had written on the side of it, now there'll be some recognition here, I think, Domesticon was written down the side of it in big black letters. And I said, I don't know. And he said, no, I don't know either. What is it? It's a weird device anyway. So we retired, went to bed. The next morning, I was supposed to be in Time magazine. That was a Monday morning. And Time magazine comes out on the stands on a Monday morning. And I was down at the newsstand. And I said, is Time magazine out yet? And the lady at the counter said, no, not yet. But this gentleman is waiting for it too. And I looked over, and here is Woody Allen standing there. And I had met him before. I went over and reintroduced myself, and he remembered me vaguely, I'm sure. And he said, what are you doing in the hotel there? And I said, well, I'm the Alice Cooper group. He said, is Alice in in the hotel? And I said, yeah. And I took a piece of paper and I said, this is secret. And I wrote down your room number and gave it to him. Later on that night, when I walked into the arena, he comes rushing over to me, says, you sent Woody Allen to my room. And I thought, I'm going to get it now. And he said, oh, wonderful. He embraced me and he said, wonderful, wonderful. I'm in his new movie. And he is in Sleeper.
Yes.
Sleeper, he's standing at the side of the highway, not in makeup or anything like that, and he's just standing hitching a ride from the Domesticon. That was the big white van that contained the servants that had the thing plugged into their mouth and whatnot. You may remember it if you remember the movie Sleeper. They're all going to go and order copies of it right now, of course. And that's where they had the McDonald's sign where it said, so many sold, and the figure went all the way down along the desert into infinity. It was 000 all the way along it. And so you actually got into the movie.
Woody was actually, I was a reference in 2 or 3 movies, in Annie Hall.
Oh, yeah.
I got a joke about me in Annie Hall, and there was another one in Celebrity where he was talking about this rock star that had snakes up in the room and everything like that. So there was a little bit of I was a big Woody Allen fan. I thought, take the money and run.
Well, was that the first time that you met Woody Allen?
Actually, it was. But I, living in New York, I'd seen him at Elaine's, and bumped into him a few times. But I didn't really realize that he was pretty much an Alice Cooper fan.
Oh, yes, he was.
Yeah, so it was really
nice. He lit
nice.
up when I said that.
Yeah, he's a unique character. I just saw his new movie. It's actually very good. To Rome with Love or whatever.
Oh,
it is.
Yeah.
I kind of wish he'd go back to the early Woody Allen movies. I thought those were really, really hysterically funny.
He's in a different phase, I suppose now. Yeah.
But the movies are very clever. They're very good.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You guys have such incredible chemistry together with each other, and yet you've only...
Not illegal either. That's just legal chemistry.
I know, alcohol only. I got that reference already. But basically, Mr. Randi, you've only worked with Mr. Cooper on one tour, which was Billion Dollar Babies,
one
correct?
tour, and I say it was 90 days, but it went a bit longer than that because we went to Brazil.
Right.
And
where did we go in
Europe?
The countries, yeah.
Well, we went all over Europe now, but the Brazil trip this was a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so they'd never had a rock concert in Brazil, ever.
And we're talking about Rio de Janeiro now, a huge city.
Yeah, so we're playing, or Sao Paulo, 38 million people, and
Incredible.
Alice Cooper shows up down there. 158,000 people indoors.
You set a record, the
It was
largest
Guinness Book of
indoor
Records. Yeah.
attendance ever.
Guinness Book of Records is, they had a place that was 8 times the size of Madison Square Garden.
You couldn't see the end of it, could you?
You couldn't, with binoculars, you couldn't see the end. Now, if you take 158,000 Brazilians and they all go at once, it's deafening.
Whoa.
158,000 drunk, stoned Brazilians at the top of their lungs. And I'm standing this close to a wall of amps the size of this wall. I can't hear a thing.
Yeah.
And the thing that I remember most about it, the next morning I get up and there's the newspaper, front page, the whole picture. And it's a picture of me with a snake around and the sword and the blood and everything. And it just says, Macumba. Because you realize that 70 or 80% of people under the equator believe in Macumba, which is a little bit of voodoo, Catholicism, this, that, and that. And so I walked down the street and people were like, hiding their children. It's kind of good, I started going.
You had to be.
He enjoyed every minute of it.
I was a Macumba god, And, it was really a great kind of feeling that, people were like, shunning like that, and I said, I love being the villain. That even fed my villainous appetite even better.
But I'm sure you remember that the stage was very, very high.
Yeah.
Very high, and it was so high that we almost had a disaster there. The crowd, this mass of people, was all pushing in. They're all standing, you see. There are no chairs for them. Standing, and we had to reach down, and the roadies had to hold us by the ankles and whatnot when they could, to haul the kids up because they were getting crushed by the crowd behind them. They could have died.
Yeah, it was, there were 3 births during the concert.
And you're not responsible for any of those?
I'm not responsible for any one of those. I think there were 3 people died of old age. It was a city, 158,000 people in a city, so it was like, what would happen at a city.
No, when you looked at that crowd, it just went off to the horizon in this huge, it was a monstrous building.
And it was indoors. It wasn't the biggest outdoor, but it was the biggest indoor audience. Now, KISS came in after that and did 144, so we still have the record. Still have the record.
Tell me the story. I don't have many of the details where Shep Gordon used some ingenious stuff. We all know that. He used really ingenious ways in and out of problems of all kinds. And I think we were in Holland. My memory doesn't serve me well in this respect. And we knew that the count of heads was wrong. And there were some 8x10 cameras there that took pictures of the audience. And Shep held up the show until they had prints and could put pinholes through every head in the audience, every face that we could see there, counting them up as we went along. And we had been shortchanged by something like 30% on the head count in the audience. But that's how Shep Gordon thought. Yeah. He thought so well, so efficiently.
Well, he's still my manager 43 years later. Shep and I are still together. We don't have a contract with each other. We've never had it's all been on a handshake. Mm-hmm. So Shep is still blasting away, putting the new show together right now, actually, in Hawaii. And one of the strangest things that happened early on in the career was the Toronto show with the chicken, okay? Now, we had no idea. This was just going to be a big I think there was maybe 100,000 people in Toronto. I was going to go on between the Doors and John and Yoko. And Shep put this whole thing together for these Canadian guys, and they were going to pay him, and he said, I don't want to be paid. I want Alice to go on between these two acts at the prime time. That was his payment. That's how managers think,
Good managers.
So we're up there on stage, and at the very end of our show, we used to open pillows up. One feather pillow would fill this room with CO2 cartridges. It would look like a snowstorm. We had 5 feather pillows up there, and they're like, and Jim Morrison's over here in the Doors, and they're going, yeah, this is great. John Lennon's going, yes, this is wonderful. And all of a sudden I look down and there's a chicken on stage, and I went, well, I didn't bring it. It's appropriate because it's a white chicken, and being from Detroit, I had never been on a farm in my life. I figured, well, it's got wings, it's got feathers, it should fly, So I picked it up nicely and just kind of chucked it into the audience. I figured, well, somebody's going to get a great souvenir. Now, they don't fly as much as they plummet into the audience, and the audience tears it to pieces. This was called the Toronto Peace Festival. A piece of this, a piece of that, a piece of this. And they throw the rest of it back on stage. Now it's this mutilated chicken, Next day in the paper, of course, Alice Cooper kills chicken and drinks blood, and And if you saw Alice, you would go, oh, okay, I believe that, because you would see this character and think, well, that's what happened. The kicker to the story is the first 5 rows were all in wheelchairs.
Oh, yeah.
So it was the people in wheelchairs that killed the chicken. To this day, I'm thinking, let's take it back to the basics. Let me see, I got my keys, I got my wallet, I got my tickets, got my chicken. Who brings a chicken to an Alice Cooper concert, And then I thought the only person that could have brought the chicken is Shep. Knowing this was going to happen. Knowing that it was going to, Frank Zappa called me the next day and said, did you kill a chicken on stage last night? And I went, no. And he said, well, don't tell anybody, they love it. And I went, okay. Next thing when people would say, did you kill a chicken? I went, no, I don't want to talk about that. And to this day, I go into a city, and it's the ASPCA is there. Are you going to kill chickens? I went, no, I'm not going to kill chicken. And in the reality, I never would kill any animal ever, But that was the reputation we got then. To this day, of chicken. They never mentioned Colonel Sanders.
No.
Who was like killed billions of chickens. One chicken. It's like, eat one missionary and you're a cannibal, right?
Yeah, exactly. And not a very smart chicken.
The rest of your life.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what the hell am I here for? Anyway, we can segue into more blood and guts and that kind of carnage. Mr. Randy, can you explain to me how you came up with the idea of the guillotine? And in fact, how did you set up Mr. Cooper to have his head removed every concert?
Well, first of all, the guillotine was, that's the French pronunciation, you see.
Furnier.
The guillotine, yes. The guillotine was invented by a man named Guillotine. Figures, doesn't it? In France many, many years ago, before the French Revolution, and it was used to decapitate sheep and such. A very small one, of course, you see. And it was later adopted by the revolutionaries. It sounded a very good way to chop off the heads of aristocrats. But the guillotine trick that I used was not designed by me. I've never taken credit for that. It was designed by a fellow named Will Rock, R-O-C-K, an ancient magician who came up with an idea of how to do the thing in such a way that the head that fell into the basket was the head of the artist, actually, and that's what it was. It's a damn clever idea. I'm not going to go into any more details on that. You'll just have to wonder about it. And you'll look it up on Google and you'll probably find it, but it'll probably be a lie. I'll warn you in advance. Well, thank you very much. One? I've never seen a one.
Can you imagine now, I'm coming to rehearsal, and I think everybody kind of just kept it from me, the whole idea, and I get there and I look over at that and I went, what is that? It's a guillotine.
Yeah, funny you should ask.
And I'm not stupid. My brain's going click, click, click. I may be drunk, but I wasn't stupid, And it's so, yeah. Okay.
In a previous year, you had been hanged.
I'd been hanged, but I'd never been guillotined, And of course, I'm looking at the blade and I go, well, it's foam rubber, No, it's a 40-pound blade. And I take a piece of paper and I go, shh. Okay, so it's a real guillotine.
Because with a dull blade, you'd suffer, you see.
Yeah, but that's it. If it was going to cut my head off, it was going to be, if you were at that concert, you got to see it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And he's explaining to me how it works, and I'm going, what? I'm not putting my head in there, Pretty soon they got me to put my head in. They showed me how the device worked, and I went, so if I do this wrong, my head comes off, for real. Yeah. And I went, okay.
I just said maybe.
In every bit that we did, there was an element of danger. There was actually a moment, if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, where you could be decapitated, or you could be hung. If the device didn't work correctly, if this didn't work, the rope was going to go around my neck, and I was tied, my hands were tied. I liked the idea that was part of it. I liked the idea that when I went to the circus, when the guy was on the trapeze up there, and I looked down, I went, if he misses, he's going to die. I liked the element of that in it. I wanted the audience to be part of knowing that it could be fatal.
Well, I've got a wonderful souvenir at home. It's a picture of me dressed in a poncho. A Mexican, no, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm trying to get this stuff out of the way. You're working for me, but no thanks. Something to show you. Dressed in the poncho, I was at the place where the artist made your head.
Yeah.
And you had to have, what did they use?
No, I had to do the cast, in those days you had to actually do, it's the most claustrophobic thing you'll ever do in your life, where they actually have to make a cast of your head, so all your senses are cut off for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, and it feels great. I've gone through the procedure, and it's not a lot of fun. But I have a surprise for you, Coop.
Oh, no.
I have the original Alice Cooper head that was cast at that time, and there it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's in plastic. We got a hole in the back of it.
Yeah, when I get shot?
We're having a fight over it,
okay.
Of course, yes. But this is the original Alice Cooper head, And from this one, the other ones are molded.
Right.
How many did you make altogether?
They had to make 5 or 6 of them, and the one we use now is still from that cast.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
can't
So you
have
hold on to that.
But I'm going to ask you to autograph this.
Oh, absolutely.
When the time
Yeah,
comes.
yeah.
We need a special autographing pen for this, of course.
Yeah.
And this is the original, the very first one. I wasn't there when the thing was being cast on your face, but I was there when they were finishing it off afterwards. And I've still got a couple of souvenir pictures of that are mementos of my wasted youth, let's put it that way. But that is the original, ladies and gentlemen.
That
The
is
makeup
amazing.
isn't too
I didn't
great.
know you had that. That's great.
No, I didn't put that makeup on.
Yeah.
Someone else did, so
Yeah.
there you go.
That's very good. You know, I think I got to tell you a great story about Randy.
Uh-oh.
Randy carries a check in his wallet.
I used to.
Do you have it now?
No, I don't carry the check anymore because we don't do business that way. That's
They
old
take
fashioned.
credit now?
That's what old folks would do.
Okay.
Yeah.
To debunk anybody that could prove that Uri Geller was psychic.
Or any psychic is
Any
psychic for that matter, yeah.
Uri Geller happened to be the hot guy at the time.
At the time.
Yeah. It was really a unique thing because everybody was into psychics. Everybody wanted to believe in this. And here was Randy going against the flow, going, no. He says, you got to prove that to me.
Well, at our display table outside, we actually have $1 million checks signed by me, but it says right there in small type that this is not a valid check for, et cetera, et cetera.
But there was a time when you did have a check that was...
Oh, yeah, I had $10,000.
$10,000.
$10,000 check, and that was the initial, I would sacrifice that immediately if somebody did something really psychic.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing, you know, that somebody would go against the flow of everybody wanting to believe in this to go the other way.
Well, the thing is, these so-called psychics are doing a lot of damage to a younger generation. They're getting them thinking in the wrong way. I don't deny that there are psychic phenomena happening. I don't deny that because I can't prove a negative of that sort. But I offer the $1 million. It's not mine. It belongs to the foundation that I represent. $1 million is a huge carrot to hang out there, even in today's inflation. It still is a good sum of money to offer as a prize to anyone who can prove that they have psychic powers. They should be lined up outside this hotel right now waiting to claim the $1 million because there are tens of thousands of them all over the world. We get applications for it all the time, but the only applications that come in are not from Uri Geller or Sylvia Brown or other people like John Edward. None of these people. Don't apply for it. They say, oh, I'm not interested. They're very interested in $1 million, and particularly to make me look like some sort of a fool. But the ones we get them from are from people who genuinely believe they have psychic powers. And we test them every year in Las Vegas and all the way through the year and around the world through other experts, other scientists who can handle that sort of thing for us. And I never sit in on it. You know why? Because the psychics have adopted an attitude, no, if James Randi is there, he'll put out negative vibrations, so I can't be psychic. Duh! So when I did a test with the BBC for homeopathy, they said, well, we'll call you in. I said, no, I want you to 48 hours after the tests are all done, all tabulated in the computer and such, then tell me that the experiment has been done. And that's exactly what they do. And of course, homeopathy didn't work either. But that prize, that check, I did carry it around for $10,000.
Yeah, for a long time.
For a long time.
Now, see, I went to claim the check because I thought he said psychos. And I said, well...
And you would have won.
I would have won that money.
Certainly.
So I had this great idea, and I was going to bring it to you for a reality show about when they were trying to catch bin Laden. I said, why don't they put 10 psychics on a helicopter over Afghanistan?
And push them out.
You know, and... No, you just put them up over the... And they can find a little girl buried, you know, in Idaho behind a barn by looking at her dress or something. And I'm going, why can't they find this guy? So I said, put these guys on there, the 10 top psychics, put them over Afghanistan. And the guy that comes up with the least each week gets voted off the helicopter, you know. He said, don't worry, you should have known this was coming.
Number 7, step forward, please, over to the door.
So, and if you win, it's $25 million. I mean, you catch the guy.
Where did you get $25 million?
Well, we were going to pay $25 million to whoever caught Bin Laden, right?
Oh,
so
yeah,
I said,
well,
well,
that's
if they
true.
do
Yes,
win,
yes,
it's
of
win-win.
Of course.
We get the guy, right?
Yeah, wow.
So it never came to fruition. Nobody wanted to do it. But I was going to call you and say I was going to put you in charge of this.
Oh, thank you.
You would have been perfect for that.
Yeah, think of the mail I'd get. Oh, boy. So,
Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the close of our panel. I know it's only been, I know, we have to do this. I'm so sorry. But on a good note, immediately following this panel, Mr. Cooper will be doing autographs at 6 p.m., not immediately following this panel, but at 6 p.m. in room 208 in the Hilton. Room 208.
Wait, 208.
Yeah, you knew that was coming.
Getting something there for a
I'll
second.
make a note for you.
Room 208 in the Hilton, actually all weekend long. Mr. Randy will be everywhere. I just don't know much of what to say about you two. You guys have been fantabulous, incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you so
You
much.
gel so well together. So without any further ado, this is only Friday. It's only the first day. You will see these gentlemen all weekend long. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
Mr. James Randi and Mr. Alice Cooper.
Thank you so much. Hey.
I'd like to introduce to you our first guest. He's known as Mr. Alice Cooper's executioner. Let's give a nice round of applause for the fantabulous magician known as Mr. James Randi. And before we introduce our next guest, I've been given permission. I've been given the greatest permission to read an excerpt from the upcoming book, A Magician in the Laboratory, as written by Mr. James.
That's
Randi himself.
laboratory, not lavatory, in case you're wondering.
Laboratory, how's that?
Very good.
All right. This is from his words. Years ago, I toured the USA and several foreign markets as part of the Alice Cooper rock show, the $1 Billion Babies episode. My job was to chop Coop's head off with a guillotine every single night, hopefully without actually doing him any harm. It worked for more than 3 months, and during that period of time, I had the nightly opportunity of seeing a rather unique phenomenon. Coop and I were always the last to leave the dressing room to begin the show because I had to equip him with 2 handheld mechanisms that enabled him to throw long flames from his fingertips. These were semi-dangerous. Who ever heard of semi-dangerous? Semi-dangerous? These were semi-dangerous devices which he'd only take it to his hands at the very last moment. When, like I said once before, this is our $1 Billion Babies Tour 1973, so this discussion is going to mainly focus on that. I'm sure many of you may have a few questions, but we're going to listen to these gentlemen chat, and I have, I guess, the start of this question. Mr. Cooper, how in fact did you find this man?
Well, you know, the idea was we had already basically decided that rock and roll needed another dimension, and rock and roll didn't have a villain. Rock and roll was full of heroes, but there was no villain. And I would gladly be Captain Hook to all the Peter Pans out there. You know, I was born to be the villain. And so we decided that Alice Cooper, I mean, I would definitely be the Basil Rathbone of rock and roll. And when we finally got that, we pretty much alienated every organization in America and thought, let's take it one step further and bring illusion into it now. The most dangerous thing in the world was to give Alice Cooper money. You know, because we were making our own props, and we would find things backstage, and that would be the prop for the night. We actually had money now because School's Out did very well. And then all of a sudden, $1 Billion Babies was the #1 record, and we could afford the best guy in the business. So we said, well, let's get Randy, and let's start adding illusion to the show. And that's when we came up with the, you know, the guillotine and things like that. And I really wasn't willing to put my head in a guillotine without somebody that really knew what they were doing.
Wise decision.
Yeah.
I must tell you how I heard about it. I don't know whether you know this story, Coop. I was in the magic shop, of all places, on 34th Street one afternoon with some of the other magicians sitting around. We were telling one another stories, some of them true. And the phone rang, and the proprietor picked up the phone, answered it, and then he put his hand over the phone, and he said, a fellow connected with an Alice Cooper. I hadn't heard the name, frankly, I must admit I had, and he hadn't heard either. He said he wants to talk to a magician who will travel with a rock show. And I put up my hand and I said, I'll do it if he pays me $100 just to talk to him. And he went back to the phone and he said, he'll pay it. $100 at that time was a lot more than $100 today, I can assure you. I got out of there, I burned the stairs as I went down, and I showed up at the Alive Enterprises office. You weren't there.
No.
And, but Shep was, and several other people. I think Joe Gannon might have been there.
Joe Gannon, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I noticed something about the decor. This is great. They had potted plants all over the place, all dead. This is Alive Enterprises, remember? And all the potted plants hadn't been watered, they were all dead. I thought that was a good touch, and I said, oh, these are my kind of people, right away. And they talked to me, and we made a deal, and I ended up working for the $1 Billion Baby Show.
Yeah, he was the perfect, I think the perfect foil for Alice. It was it was the first time anybody had seen this kind of a show anyways. So when you're adding another dimension to it, all of a sudden you're doing, Alice would be over here, and Randy would say, now when you go over there, we're going to switch this over here. And you're misdirecting the audience, and it's all stuff that we wanted to do but didn't know how to do.
The stage manager would poke his head in the door and announce 2 minutes. I would watch Vincent Furnier.
Well, close enough.
Yeah, him too. Coop's original name rapidly and almost magically changed from a reasonably normal young man into the showbiz monster that his audience expected him to be. He adopted the character by simply putting it on like a pullover. His walk, his facial expression, his entire demeanor changed. And a moment later, as he would totter up the stairs, Frankenstein monster-like, into the spotlight, Vincent would become Alice Cooper. 2 hours later, when he retired from the stage, dressed in white satin tails and top hat, he again became Vincent as soon as he hit the lights of the dressing room. I always admired that in him, his ability to step into fantasy and then shed it so easily. It's a talent we might all try to acquire. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alice Cooper!
Furnier. Vincent Damon Furnier. And by the way, Randy actually looked like this in 1976. And I have pictures of him as a baby. He looked just like this. It's amazing.
Yeah. First one.
My apologies for bastardizing your last name.
No,
I
it's
never
okay.
studied French. But it's a wonderful name nonetheless. Folks, as you know, like...
And that's when we brought Randy in. He was the guy that really knew how to do all that stuff.
Which, if I could interject, which was an amazing thing about that, because this was live. We were, back in '73, Rosemary's Baby, things of that nature.
Right.
That kind of horror genre was, movie, special effects, theatrics in that way. This was live, could not be messed up, could not be fooled, could not be tricked, the whole 9 yards. You brought in the amazing Randy to chop your head off, and obviously it succeeded because you went on a few other locations after that to carry out those same tricks, I do believe.
Well,
And every night he would be back the next morning alive, and I couldn't figure it out. I chopped his head off. Come on, he doesn't seem to take chopping very seriously.
We did another bit called, it was Unfinished Sweet. And the story behind this was, the guy would go to a dentist office and he would get under gas and he would have this dream that he was a super spy. So one guitar would be playing the Man from U.N.C.L.E. theme, One guitar would be playing I Spy, and the other thing, the James Bond theme. Now, if you put them all together, they actually all work together. But I would be in the dentist chair, and Randy would come out as the mad dentist. And he had a drill that was bigger than him. And it came down, it was all lit up, and he would start drilling my teeth, and then he would take it down to my crotch and start drilling my crotch. I don't remember rehearsing that part. I think
that's very true, very true. I made it up.
You improvised that part, yeah. And it was, you know, when you see film of this right now, it's very vaudevillian. But that was the charm of it, I think, was the fact that everything was trying to be high tech, and we went back to the vaudevillian kind of attitude of rock and roll, which drew people like, you know,